What do you mean Nathan isn't coming? The words slipped out sharper than I intended, but the sterile smell of disinfectant and the constant hum of medical equipment had been eating away at my patience for days. I was propped up in a hospital bed at Providence St. Patrick in Missoula, my right hand still weak from the stroke I'd had less than 2 weeks ago. Mom shifted uncomfortably in the visitor's chair, her coat folded neatly on her lap like she was afraid to wrinkle it. She avoided my eyes, choosing instead to study the bland watercolor print on the wall. "He's busy, Margaret," she said finally. "The twins are starting kindergarten. His job's been so demanding lately." I let out a bitter laugh. "He works from home, and I'm supposed to figure out how to get up the stairs to my apartment without collapsing." Her lips pressed into a thin line. No denial. No promise to make him reconsider. Just silence. That's when it hit me. My brother had decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience. The same brother I'd bailed out of credit card debt, the one who lived rent-free in my spare room after his divorce, the one I defended to our father more times than I could count. I could still hear his voice from that speakerphone call Mom took in my hospital room 3 days ago. He didn't even try to whisper. "She's dramatic, Mom. She'll be fine. I can't put my life on hold for her." The words stuck to me like frostbite. From my window I could see the mountains, jagged, snow-capped, indifferent. And somewhere in that quiet I made a decision. If Nathan thought I was a burden now, he was going to learn exactly how wrong he was. This stroke might have slowed me down, but it wasn't going to finish me. It was going to change me. To understand why Nathan's refusal cut so deep, you have to know where we came from. We grew up in a small timber frame house on the outskirts of Kalispell, Montana. Winters were long, summers were short, and our parents ran a modest hardware store on Main Street. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and every member of the family had their role. Mine was responsibility. By the time I was 12, I was opening the shop on Saturday mornings when Dad had to make deliveries. I balanced the cash drawer, stocked shelves, even learned how to track inventory by hand. Nathan, 3 years younger, was the creative one. That was Mom's polite way of saying he could disappear for hours without anyone knowing where he was, then show up with a wild story about finding an injured fox or trying to build a treehouse out of scrap wood. And somehow those stories made him charming. No one seemed to mind that he left half his chores undone. When Dad got sick during my junior year of high school, I was the one who started closing the shop at night, helping Mom with the bookkeeping and making sure Nathan did at least the bare minimum of his schoolwork. By the time I left for college in Missoula, I thought I'd earned my escape. I majored in public administration, took an internship at the county clerk's office, and never looked back. I bought my own townhouse at 32, traveled when I could, and built a reputation at work as someone who could handle impossible caseloads without breaking. Meanwhile, Nathan drifted from job to job: graphic design, landscaping, freelance marketing. Anytime he hit a wall, I was the one he called. And I always answered. When his startup failed, I wrote a check to keep his apartment from being repossessed. When his marriage collapsed, I turned my guest room into his personal recovery suite for the better part of a year. Maybe that's why the stroke felt so unfair. One moment I was drafting a grant proposal, the next my right hand went numb and my words slurred together like I was speaking through water. I remember the cold panic on my coworker Jenna's face as she called 911, the sensation of my body becoming something foreign and unreliable. In those first hours at the hospital, I didn't question whether Nathan would be there. Of course he would. He'd owed me more times than either of us could count. But when the moment came and I needed him in a way I'd never needed anyone before, my brother, the boy I'd practically raised, was nowhere to be found. That's when I realized something that would stick with me long after the bruises from the IVs faded. There's a fine line between helping someone and teaching them you'll always be their safety net. And Nathan had learned that lesson all too well. After the hospital discharged me, I didn't go home. Home was a 2-story townhouse with narrow stairs, a clawfoot tub that required a gymnast's balance to get into, and a kitchen where every heavy pot lived on a high shelf. In other words, a disaster for someone who still struggled to hold a coffee mug without her hand shaking. Instead, I moved into a tiny ground-floor rental on the edge of town. The kind of place with beige walls, a single drafty window, and a faint smell of someone else's cooking clinging to the carpet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I could get from the bed to the bathroom without climbing a single step. Those first weeks were humbling. I dropped things constantly. Forks, books, my phone, all hitting the floor like tiny insults. Even my cat Hazel seemed unsure about me, tilting her head like she was trying to figure out why her usually decisive human now moved like a cautious shadow. The physical therapist came twice a week. Her name was Elise, and she had the kind of bright, unflappable energy that made it hard to feel sorry for yourself for long. She pushed me and I pushed back, but slowly my body began to obey me again. I celebrated the first time I buttoned my coat without fumbling. I cried the day I could chop an onion without fear of slicing my own finger. But recovery wasn't just physical. It was emotional too. I had to rewire the part of my brain that still expected Nathan to call and check on me. For a while, every ring of my phone made my heart jump. It was never him. Once it was a wrong number from Idaho. Another time a robocall about my car warranty. Silence from family has a way of getting louder with time. So I filled that silence. I joined a local support group for stroke survivors. Most of them were older, retired teachers, farmers, a former mail carrier, but they understood what it meant to have your life split into before and after by a single medical event. They didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with recognition. One evening after a meeting, a man named Walt handed me a business card. "You're good at helping people think through problems," he said. "If you ever feel up to it, the city council needs volunteers for the new community garden project." I almost said no. I still felt fragile, like the wrong gust of wind could knock me over. But later that night, sitting in my little beige apartment with Hazel curled in my lap, I thought about what Elise kept saying during therapy. Movement is progress. Maybe she wasn't just talking about my muscles. That was the first time I let myself wonder if I could rebuild my life without waiting for Nathan, or anyone, to show up. The first community garden meeting was held in a drafty room above the public library. The kind of space with mismatched chairs, a flickering fluorescent light, and a faint smell of old paper that somehow made it feel safe. I sat near the back, still unsure why I'd come. My right hand ached from the cold and my coat felt too heavy on my shoulders. But when the meeting started, something shifted. They weren't just talking about planting vegetables. They were talking about building something. A place where people could work side by side, share what they grew, and feed neighbors who couldn't always afford fresh produce. I'd spent years writing grant proposals, managing budgets, organizing teams. I knew how to get things like this off the ground. And for the first time since my stroke, I felt that old spark. The part of me that loved turning ideas into reality. By the end of the meeting, I'd volunteered to draft the project timeline. It felt small, almost insignificant, but it was a crack in the wall I'd been living behind. I started showing up twice a week, my cane tapping on the library's old wooden steps, my notepad filling with dates, contact names, and sketches of possible layouts for the garden beds. Some evenings I'd walk home past the courthouse where I used to work, my reflection catching in the darkened windows. For months I'd avoided that street entirely. Now I stopped to look. I didn't feel like the woman who'd been carried out of there on a stretcher. I felt like someone coming back to life. It was during one of those walks that I saw him, Nathan. He was crossing Main Street with a paper cup of coffee in one hand, his phone in the other. I froze. He didn't. He just walked right past me, eyes glued to the screen, not even a flicker of recognition. For a second the air left my lungs. I thought about calling his name, about demanding he look at me, but I didn't. Instead I turned and kept walking. And with every step a strange thought settled over me. Maybe the best revenge wasn't getting him to see me at all. Maybe it was building something so solid, so undeniably mine, that I didn't need him to. By spring, the community garden had transformed from an idea on paper into a muddy, bustling patch of land on the edge of town. Volunteers showed up in old jeans and work boots, hauling lumber for raised beds and spreading compost that clung to everything like a stubborn memory. I was there nearly every day. Some mornings I brought coffee for the early crew. Other days I stayed until sunset, jotting down supply lists and checking off tasks. The cold, brittle weakness in my right hand was slowly being replaced by a steadier grip. Elise, my physical therapist, said it was the best therapy I could have given myself. Real work with a real purpose. The project became my anchor. It also became my introduction back into the community. I met people I'd only ever seen in passing before. Angie, a retired nurse who swore she could grow tomatoes in a snowstorm. Raphael, a soft-spoken carpenter with an endless supply of tools and patience. And Leah, a single mom who brought her 2 boys to help plant onions. One afternoon, as I was measuring the distance between beds, Leah asked, "So what got you into this?" "Always been a gardener." I smiled. "Not really. I just needed to start over. This seemed like a good place to do it. What I didn't say was that every seed we put in the ground felt like an act of defiance. A quiet reminder to myself that growth was still possible, even after something had torn you apart. And then came the email. It was from the city's community development office, letting me know our garden project had been chosen for a small grant. Nothing huge, just enough to cover tools and a proper irrigation system, but it was proof that what we were doing mattered. That night, I sat in my apartment, the grant letter on the table beside me, and realized something I hadn't admitted before. I wasn't just healing. I was building. And the more I built, the less room there was for Nathan in the picture at all. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky couldn't decide between rain or sunshine. I was at the garden working with Raphael to secure a trellis for the climbing beans, when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in months. Margaret. I turned and there he was, Nathan. His hair was a little longer, his shirt crisp and untucked, and in his hand, a takeout cup from the same coffee shop where I'd seen him ignore me. For a moment neither of us moved. I could feel Raphael glance at me, then quietly excuse himself to check the shed. Nathan stepped closer, his expression a careful mix of casual and concerned, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. I heard you've been busy. He gestured at the garden, his tone hovering somewhere between admiration and judgment. I stayed still, leaning lightly on my cane. I have. He nodded, scanning the rows of newly sprouted greens. Looks good. Listen, I wanted to check in. See how you're doing. The words were smooth, but there was something behind them, hesitation, maybe even a touch of guilt. Still, I could hear the subtext as clearly as if he'd said it. I didn't think you could do this without me. I'm doing fine, I said evenly. Better than fine, actually. He shifted, cleared his throat. Mom's been talking about you a lot lately. She said you've really bounced back. Bounced back. Like I'd tripped on a curb instead of having a stroke. Before I could reply, he added, maybe we could grab lunch sometime. Catch up. I looked past him at the rows of neat garden beds, the volunteers laughing as they unloaded mulch, the hum of something alive and growing without his involvement. I'll think about it, I said, though we both knew I wouldn't. Nathan left a few minutes later, walking back toward his car with the same easy stride he'd had the day he walked past me on Main Street. But this time I didn't feel invisible. I felt untouchable. Summer settled over Montana like a warm quilt, long days, slow sunsets, and the earthy smell of sun-warmed soil rising from the garden. By July the beds were bursting. Tomatoes ripened in clusters, squash leaves fanned out like green umbrellas, and sunflowers stood tall enough to watch the street traffic over the fence. We turned that patch of dirt into something alive and people noticed. The local paper ran a short piece about our project, complete with a photo of me standing between two volunteers, holding a basket of kale. At the farmer's market, strangers stopped me to ask about volunteer days or to thank me for the produce we donated to the food bank. It felt steady. Thought, like I had a place again. Elise told me my recovery was ahead of schedule. My right hand no longer trembled when I signed my name, and I could walk a mile without feeling like I'd run a marathon. Every milestone felt like a private victory, proof that I hadn't just survived the stroke, I was outpacing it. And then one Saturday morning Mom showed up at the garden. She was dressed in her usual weekend uniform, neat jeans, a pastel sweater, her hair perfectly set despite the heat. She walked slowly between the rows, her eyes scanning everything before she reached me. This is impressive, she said finally, her voice soft, almost reluctant. I didn't answer right away. The last time we'd spoken she'd been making excuses for Nathan. She glanced down at her hands, then back at me. He's struggling, Margaret. Work's been unpredictable and the kids keep him busy. I think he feels like he let you down. I let the words hang in the air, the buzz of bees and the sunflowers filling the silence. Maybe he did, I said, my tone even. But I'm not here to fix that for him. For a moment something flickered in her eyes. Maybe understanding, maybe just surprise. Then she nodded and changed the subject, asking about the basil harvest. As she left, I realized I didn't feel the old ache I used to whenever our conversations drifted toward Nathan. The garden had given me more than a purpose. It had given me permission to stop carrying everyone else's weight. It was late August when the email landed in my inbox. Subject line, partnership proposal. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another form letter from a seed supplier. But when I opened it, I saw the sender. A regional nonprofit that specialized in food security programs. They'd read about our garden in the paper and wanted to meet about funding and expansion. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning at their office downtown. I wore the navy blazer I hadn't touched since my courthouse days, the fabric still holding a faint trace of the cedar from my closet. My cane felt almost unnecessary now, but I brought it anyway, not as a crutch but as a reminder of how far I'd come. The director, a woman named Teresa with warm eyes and a voice like a steady engine, got straight to the point. "We love what you've done here, Margaret. We'd like to help you replicate it in 3 other towns." 3 other towns. My mind spun with images. New beds tilled into fresh soil, volunteers laughing under the sun, fresh produce filling food pantry shelves. And then a detail that made my breath catch. One of those towns was Nathan's. Teresa slid a folder toward me, full of timelines and proposed budgets. We'd cover the initial costs, but we'd need someone to oversee the rollout. Someone who's proven they can make this work. I ran my fingers over the edge of the folder, feeling the weight of what she was offering. By the time I walked out of that meeting, I'd said yes. Not for Nathan, not even for the satisfaction of planting something in his backyard. I did it because the garden had stopped being just mine. It had become a blueprint for how to rebuild: soil, seed, and stubborn persistence. And maybe, just maybe, part of me wanted Nathan to see what I could do when no one believed in me. The first site visit for the expansion took me straight into Nathan's territory, a small riverside park in his town that the city had agreed to dedicate for the new garden. When I arrived, the place was a mess. Waist-high weeds choked the old flower beds, the fence sagged in 3 places, and an abandoned picnic table leaned on one leg like it was too tired to stand straight. The city liaison was late, so I walked the perimeter alone, making notes about what needed clearing and where we could place the raised beds. That's when I heard his voice. "Well, this is unexpected." I turned to see Nathan standing at the edge of the park, coffee in hand, sunglasses pushed up on his head. He was dressed casually, but there was an edge in his posture, guarded, curious. "I heard through Mom you were coming to town," he said, stepping closer. "Didn't think it was for this." He waved at the overgrown lot like it was barely worth the trouble. "It's part of an expansion," I said simply. "We're building 3 new community gardens. This is one of them." He let out a low whistle. "Ambitious. You're running this whole thing." "Yes." I didn't add, "without your help." I didn't need to. For a second he just looked at me like he was trying to reconcile the sister who needed a cane with the one standing here, mapping out a project in his own backyard. "Maybe I could pitch in," he said finally. "Help out a little." It sounded like an olive branch, but it was also a test. His way of seeing if I'd rush to fold him into what I'd built. I smiled faintly. "We have a volunteer sign-up sheet online. Anyone can join." He blinked like he wasn't sure whether I'd just invited him or brushed him off. Maybe it was both. Either way, I walked past him toward the parking lot, the late afternoon sun warm on my back, and didn't look over my shoulder. By the following spring, the expansion gardens were thriving. Each town had its own rhythm. One ran weekly cooking classes, another hosted weekend farmers markets, and Nathan's site had turned into a surprisingly vibrant gathering spot. I visited all 3 regularly, clipboard in hand, checking irrigation lines, advising on crop rotations, and listening to volunteers swap stories over rows of lettuce. The day I returned to Nathan's garden for the ribbon cutting, the place looked unrecognizable from that first overgrown lot. The beds were neat, the fence sturdy, and children darted between rows, carrying watering cans almost as big as they were. Nathan was there, standing off to the side in a faded baseball cap, chatting with a group of volunteers. When he spotted me, he gave a short nod, not quite a smile but not nothing either. The mayor gave a brief speech, the ribbon was cut, and the crowd scattered to explore. I walked the rows slowly, letting the hum of conversation and the scent of fresh basil wash over me. Nathan approached, hands in his pockets. "Looks good," he said, glancing around. "Didn't think it would, but it does." I met his eyes. "It's not about what you think, Nathan. It's about what it gives to people who need it." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he'd considered an apology but wasn't ready to hand it over. And maybe I didn't need it anymore. As I left that afternoon, the sound of laughter followed me to my car. I realized that what I'd built, in these gardens, in myself, wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could plant something in broken ground and watch it flourish.